257. I think I can count it. Look and live. Amen, brother. Make a joyful noise.
It's on the back. Oh, I forgot about that. Here.
Oh. You got one, brother?
Oh, I'm good.
You good? All right, I'll hear you sing.
Oh, I will. I'll do my part.
That piano player don't give up, does she?
No, she doesn't. And singing with, playing music for us, that's quite a job, too. I'll tell you what.
We're lucky to have her.
Yes, sir. We rejoice on that.
song, buddy.
I'm
Just a
gonna take
week
money.
late, but you got it in.
I thought about it even talking, you always talking about the stars and all, hey, the stars in too.
Uh-huh, yeah.
You said always look at the words, much as a song. Look at the words, Justin said it. He says, little girl, the family looks at the stars in the universe.
All right, well, we prayed for Evelyn. Evelyn's surgery went well, and she's home recouping. She's having some pain, though, not able to sleep from what Terry was saying. So continue to pray for her and for her recuperation. And so anyway, Terry's planning on being here on Sunday morning, so that'll be a blessing. So continue to pray for Evelyn. All right, well, we have a few we'll just go over this evening. Bill Mitchell, as we mentioned last week, to pray for him. Doesn't look very promising as far as the need that he has for the surgery for the hip. There's still, I did talk to him today again, and he said that the conversation that we mentioned last week, that his surgeon was going to be in conversation with another surgeon to see if there was any other alternative to be able to have the surgery. They still haven't heard back from that conversation yet. So continue to pray for Brother Bill if you would. He really, really needs to have that surgery, but it doesn't look promising, but the Lord can always intervene. So be praying for Bill. A couple others there. I did talk to Carol Airliff, is down there, the first one under General Health. I reached out to Brother Eddie this afternoon, and he said that she's recouping pretty well, and so thank the Lord for that. And so anyway, we'll continue to pray for her and for her recovery there, for her back, if we would. So. And let's see, some others. Richard Driver. This is Jed's brother. We got to find it straight. I think. Anyway, I won't get into all that. But anyway, Jed's brother, and there's a great need there. Talked to Debbie yesterday at length, and continue to pray for the family. Some decisions are having to be made there. The doctors are saying that there's only about like a 5% chance, we put that in the bulletin there, of regaining all of his functions. So not too promising. So we continue to pray for him. Then they're thinking about putting him in some type of a nursing facility, but he will be on life support. So keep them in your prayers if you would. They came back home, but only temporarily. She said that she hated that she was going to miss tonight, but they're going to be going back down tomorrow. So continue to pray for their family. Evelyn Eco, we mentioned her. Continue to pray for her. Also, the church did send some flowers to her, and Evelyn really loved that. Of course, Evelyn loves flowers anyway, right? And so anyway, she really enjoyed that. So I know that was a blessing to her. Continue to pray for Russ and Betty Fold. Both are home. It's good to see Betty here on Sunday, and so it's good. And she's going to be here again this week, she said. So Russ is still improving. He's supposed to be going back to work within 2 weeks, and follow up. He had follow up actually today, right? 23rd. Yesterday. So continue to pray for him. Also, Ray and Alice, continue to pray for them. I talked to Ray this week, and they had their COVID shots, and I guess they had a little bit of drawback from that. I put there in the bulletin that both she and Ray had received second COVID shot, and side effects caused fever and aches. So continue to pray for them if you would, like the last thing they needed. So anyway, so keep them in your prayers if you would. And Ray's just really struggling as far as just for strength. So continue to pray for him if you would. And Sue Pierce over the next column there, she has a follow-up tomorrow. And so we're praying all goes well there. It's a green light, right? So continue to pray for Sue. Could you pray for Bob too and for his health if you would? They are under Beth Rhodes, as many companies, but waiting on MRI appointment for her knee and leg. So continue to pray for her if you would. Also, we had the update on Stony Stone. This is Terry Eco's cousin's husband. Has a liver and pancreas cancer, blood thinner issues, keeping him for 4 to 5 days in the hospital. Because of that, he was slated to come home, but because of the blood thinner issues, there was some kind of issues there, Terry said. And because of that, they're going to keep him actually in the hospital for another 4 to 5 days to make sure that's all regulated properly. So keep him in your prayers. And also his chemo began today. So be praying for Stony Stone there. Okay, I had a good encouragement text today from Larry, and he seems to be doing well. So continue to pray for him and for Shay and for Shay's cancer that she's dealing with. So continue to pray for her, and so continue to pray for their family if you would. Okay, any updates this evening as we begin?
They brought Billy home today.
Okay, so they brought Billy home. Okay. That's under Billy Blevins. They're under general health. I think it's the 5th one down. Okay. And he's still breathing on his own.
Yeah.
Great. It's a blessing. Continue to pray for his healing if you would.
They say he's been yawning.
Yawning, right?
We saw Barbara, Bonnie's wife, we saw her at Walmart, so she said she's doing a lot better.
Oh, wasn't that a blessing?
Then when you Donahue, Mr. Donahue here, oh, okay.
He was here Sunday.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's good to see him.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, how is Frank and them, how is he holding up?
Coming along, they're they really want to be here, but they're being very cautious and also, yeah, just about the COVID and everything else. So continue to pray for their family too.
I mean, is he doing all right there with Shirley? But for Frank, he can't get around it so good.
Yeah.
They do.
I'm sure it's a struggle, you know, for both of them. But thankfully they have family members, you know, that come in, Mike and Kathy, you know. That's also, by the way, the reason they haven't been reaching out to them in conversations that, you know, they're missing everybody too, but they're just being cautious because they don't want to bring anything back to Frank and Shirley especially. So, all right, anybody else have any? Yes.
Jason Hudson on that, he's had foot removed from diabetic use complications.
So foot removed. That's Jason Hudson. And you had mentioned in the earlier, so you said that they were probably going to do an artificial foot. Is that what you're saying?
He's had it cut on several times, and this time it's going to need a foot, and it takes that much off.
Okay.
So they'll need something else.
Yeah. Wasn't there a prosthetic or something of that
That's
nature?
what that's what he's on.
Okay. Okay. And this was who to you?
Jason Hudson is just a friend. I've been trying to get him to come to church for a long time. Almost done it in the men's prayers meeting.
Right.
He tells me he's going to come someday.
Right. Okay, anybody else?
I got a note from Corey, and she said she missed everybody, and she's still real depressed and all, but she hopes to come back.
Amen. Continue to pray for Corey. And we also, this week, Jennifer actually reminded me today, we're going to put her address up on the bulletin board, so if you all want to, I would encourage you to send her a little note. I know she would greatly appreciate it. So we'll put that up there for Sunday. All right, anybody else?
Something good.
Oh, good.
We had new visitors.
Yes, yeah.
come from Mechanicsville, they told me.
Yeah, they've been actually watching online our services, and anyway, they really have enjoyed the messages and the Sunday school hour, and so anyway, they were wanting to come 3 weeks ago, and then things transpired. So anyway, so I was glad that they came yesterday, and anyway, so I told them, I said, I'm glad, because I said, we didn't really have their phone number or anything to contact them. So I said, I was just praying that you'd come back, or actually come in person, so anyway, so that was a blessing, so.
Oh, so they've been watching on that little phone you got?
Yeah, that little thing there.
Oh, yeah, that's a blessing.
Yeah.
Pick it up and pin your con.
Yeah, blessing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they see you, Justin, when you was in the car doing it?
Yeah, and they still came. Yeah. So that's a blessing. All right, well, Tim, what? Brother Allen. Oh, go ahead.
I got to praise, Donna's son is back to work. He had COVID, and he got back to work in about a week. He never had any symptoms at all, but he was positive. And his wife is starting to recover, so it hit her harder than him. She had no taste, had headaches. She could breathe okay, and then they've got one kid that's got it with no symptoms.
Wow.
The other kid doesn't have it.
That's
The
weird.
little boy, he's tough. He's about that big. Run into you, knock you over. But that's a praise. Just
And what's the wife's name that's still dealing with?
Emily
Emily. And their last name?
Duncan, like in donuts. But it's not spelled
C.A.?
that way.
Okay.
C.A.N.
Okay, I was gonna say, wow.
You look pretty good, Justin. He just showed me, Jerry just has you on his phone.
Yeah.
You look pretty smart.
Keeping tabs. Actually, I'll just say this real quick. It really has been a blessing to be able to have that, because individuals that haven't been able to come back, they've been watching, and a lot of other people have been watching. Actually had, I think just this, within the last 2 weeks, there was 2 different people wanted to join the group. One of them I didn't really know. We really debated about that for a while, and letting it be a public group, because you never know what people are going to do or say. But we're just like, hey, especially, and then that was right before the COVID. And so it was, I think it was a great move. And so anyway, so it's been a great outreach. I think Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, there was like, in the end, not necessarily right when we're doing the service, but then we posted it. And I think there was like 30-some people watched it, or something of that nature. So anyway, so it's a blessing. So, and then also we put on, I do a devotional every Monday, and put that on. And so anyway, just to be a blessing, so it's a great tool. So thank the Lord for it. So, Brother Allen, would you lead us in prayer today?
Lord God, we do thank you so much for so many blessings in our life. We thank you for these songs we sang today. They all had great, wonderful thoughts, promises there. It's so good to be in your house and sing praises together, and just to exchange words with each other and see each other again, Lord. Thank you for that. Thank you for this time to come together, open your word. so much to face in the world, same world that we have to face. They're young, Lord, and they'll need you, Lord, so we pray for that. We pray for these that have so many needs physically. The health needs that they have, Lord, the pain. We think of Evelyn again, Lord. We miss her terribly, and rightfully not here, Lord. And we know that Evelyn's going, no sleep, and a lot of pain. So we're going to just ask you, Lord, take away some of that pain. Give her rest tonight, Lord, and give her peace about the operation. Heal it up, Lord, and bring her back to us. And Terry, too, we know he's taking care of her now, and it's only right that he is. We thank you for Terry and Evelyn both. We look at these other Johnny's brother that's in such need. And I thought again about Jerry and the comfort that he needs with the homegoing of his sister.
Yes.
Lord, we ask you that you provide that. Buddy and Cannonball are gone, Lord, with illness and other things, and we thank you that they're back. And we thank you for the piano lady and the music that she brings, and even the singing. Lord, we're just grateful and thank you for everyone that's here tonight. And those that are watching, there's more watching than are present, Lord, and there has been that way for quite a while, and that's all to your praise. Lord, it could be such a downer to think it's just tiny numbers, but there's not. There's probably 30, 40 people watching at home, and in general, we have about 15 to 18 a year. And so, Lord, the numbers really have grown, and we thank you for it. Lord, your word is going out to an ever-widening circle of people. And we just pray the Holy Spirit will be the power behind the words tonight and for us and for those that are watching. Thank you for our visitors. We thank you for a baptism that's about to come up. And Lord, the fellowship with the dinner afterwards, the business meeting, Lord, we take care of that. All these things, just thank you for them. Oversee each one, Lord. And then tonight, oversee what's said tonight. Open our minds and our hearts. Lord, I don't even care to hear about you unless you're going to be in it. I love Justin like a brother, Lord, but we need your power behind his words as he speaks tonight. Open our hearts, get rid of the world that's there, and help us to just take in what's there. And Lord, without you, we'll take in nothing that matters. So we pray that you do that. And Lord, thank you for all these things. We do thank you. In the name of your Son and King who died for us, we thank you. Thank you, Jesus. Lord, what a life you've given us because you died for us. Thank you. Christ's name. Amen.
Justin, I believe John watches us too. John, he told me he watches us.
You bet. It's a blessing. All right. Well, we're in chapter 39 tonight. And God is continuing to speak to Job. And you know, I was thinking about this week as going through this and studying 39 and for tonight. You know, the thought really hit me, and what a real blessing it is, in a sense, is through all of this, here you had everything that happened to Job. You had his friends coming and casting doubt on Job and everything. And of course, we have all of that dialogue. And then Elihu comes. But then you see God step in and addressing Job, but himself. And I think that's really interesting in that he's dealing with him personally. And also realizing in that fact that that's exactly how he deals with us too. And I think we should look at that as a blessing. You know, no matter what's going on around us, how people look at us, how people think about us, God deals with us individually. And really, we should be living our lives really for the audience of one. And that's the Lord Jesus Christ himself, period. And so as we look at this tonight and we keep going along here, and we're dealing in chapter 39 tonight, I think that's a blessing here, and I really believe that Job is getting this point, that God is actually dealing with Job. And he's going to continue with many other questions here tonight we'll be dealing with. But can you imagine, even in this, and even through these questions, and he's going to continue questioning Job as he has been. But you know, I try to, in these characters, I try to put myself in their position. Even though it seems like Job is probably wanting to dig a hole further and further down with every question that arises, it must be, well, you can't even describe it, but as far as what it would be like for God to be actually talking to him. And even though at times this is a reprimand to Job at moments, for Job, I'm sure in his mind, he's like, this is okay. This is actually building confidence once again in the God that he's known about most of his life, if not all of his life, at least known about. He says later on, and not to jump ahead too much, but he makes the comment at the end, in the last chapter there, 42. He says, I've heard of you by the hearing of the ear. And he had heard about God all of his life. But he says, but now my eyes see thee. So now he's able to experience God in a real way. And here we're hearing God actually verbally talking to Job. And what that must have been like. We can't experience it right now, but one day we will. And what a blessing that's going to be. But here we begin in chapter 39, beginning in verse 1. And he says here in verse 1, he says, do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? He goes, and if you remember there at the end of chapter 38, he ends up talking about the lions. Then here he's talking about the wild mountain goats bearing young. He says, do you know the time when they do this? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth? Then in verse 2, can you number the months that they fulfill? Or do you know the time when they bear young? They bow down, they bring forth their young, they deliver their offspring. Their young ones are healthy. They grow strong with grain. They depart and do not return to them. And here, really the question's being asked, do you know, in verses 1 through 4, do you know about or master the wild mountain goat? Job, basically, if you're so wise, are you and strong and have ability, are you able to tame or master the wild mountain goat? Or he talks about also in here, he talks about the deer. Here from verse 1, notice verse 1, it says, do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth?
Here, God continues to bring the level of knowledge down for Job. Here, he's talking about beforehand, if you recall, he talked about the snow, he talked about the intricacies of the flake, he talked about the rain cycles, he's talked about all of these intricate parts of his creation. And here he's bringing it down, if you notice, on each level down to, basically this would be a main observation, a standard observation to be able to, if he really was wise, to be able to see when all these things would happen. Even such simple observation was really in the end beyond Job. He didn't even have this type of knowledge. Then you go down into verse 3 where it says, they bow down, they bring forth their young, they deliver their offspring. Here God reminded Job the arrangements of growth and maturity. Then basically asked the question here, did Job design this or even know much about it? And the answer was really in the end, no. So here he's talking about the mountain goat. He goes into verses 5 through 8. Do you know about or master the wild donkey? I don't think anybody's really mastered that one yet. I don't know too much about donkeys, but I know they're pretty stubborn creatures for sure. We won't get into the political part of it. Verse 5, notice what it says. It says, who set the wild donkey free? Who loosed the bonds of the onager? By the way, that onager there is a term used biblically for just a wild donkey. So it's really one and the same. So who set the wild donkey free? Who loosed the bonds of the onager? Whose home I have made the wilderness, and the barren land his dwelling. Verse 7, he says, he scorns the tumult of the city. He does not heed the shouts of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. So here, God knew in verse 5, notice there, he says, who set the wild donkey free? Who's loosed the bonds of the onager? Again, we see here that it's a term for wild donkey. Notice verse 8, where he says the range of the mountains is his pasture, and he searches out every green thing. God knew how the wild donkey lived and was provided for, but Job obviously did not. So once again, we see God spelling out every part of his creation. And really, when you go back to it, this is actually great, not only evidence, but it's also should build up to its existence. Each one of these verses is just proof after proof for the believer that this is true. And notice here, he says, and going on in verses 9 through 12, he deals with either the wild donkey here is basically what he's talking about, or in the KJV it says mentioned 9 times. So it's an extinct animal now, as far as in today's world, but it actually lived back during that time. And this is what he's referring to here in verse 9, where he says, either unicorn or wild ox or the aurochs, you get the picture as far as this is a mighty animal that no one can tame it. And that's the point. And so he goes on there in verse 9, will the wild ox be willing to serve you? Will he bed by your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes? Or will he plow the valleys behind you? Here I think it's interesting, there in verse 10, where he says, can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes? Or will he plow the valleys behind you? Understanding the fearsome nature of this ancient animal, God made basically a humorous picture to Job. One might just as easily picture Job using a rhino to plow his fields or put him into his barn. So that's the picture God's trying to get across to Job. Do you have the strength? Do you have the ability to be able to tame this animal? To, as he says here in verse 9, will the wild ox be willing to serve you? Will he bed by your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes, or will he plow the valleys behind you? And the answer is no. Why? Because no one could tame this animal. It's untamable, humanly speaking. But God knew all about it, and why? Because he was the one that created it. So we see this here in verses 9 and 10. Verses 13 down to verse, let's read on down. He says in verse 11, he says, will you trust him because his strength is great? Or will you leave your labor to him? Will you trust him to bring home your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? And again, the answer is no. Why? Because it's not an animal for that. You're not able to train it. You're not able to tame it. It's beyond human reasoning and ability to be able to do this. And then we see verses 13 through 18, he talks about the ostrich. I think it's interesting too, isn't it? Just how that all these animals the animal names that we deal with even today, and you can see today, they're actually mentioned back then, most of them. I just think that's interesting personally. Here, notice in verses 13 down to verse 18, the question is, do you understand the ostrich? Notice here in verse 13 it says, the wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but her wings and pinions like the kindly storks. For she leaves her eggs on the ground and warms them in the dust. She forgets that a foot may crush them, or that a wild beast may break them. You know, you think about most birds, well, flighted birds, they'll actually put them, in nests and put them way up somewhere. And I remember growing up on our second floor, it was a brick home, and it was in my sister's bedroom, right on the ledge of her window. There's bluebirds would always make a nest right there, and her window was tinted, and so they couldn't really see in, but you could see them, and it was really neat. So you could see them, the eggs and the little blue eggs, and you could see them hatch, and every year it's the thing to come see, the birds are hatching. And then the day whenever the mom would, teach them to fly, and we're like, here they go, we're off the second floor, but all that's just from the hand of God, isn't it? But here we see the ostrich is a little different. Here they're burying their eggs on the ground, and just like it's talking, as these verses are saying, he says there in verse 14, for she leaves her eggs on the ground and warms them in the dust, but she forgets that a foot may crush them, or a wild beast may break them. Verse 16, she treats her young harshly, as though they were not hers. Her labors in vain without concern. Because God deprived her of wisdom, and did not endow her with understanding. When she lifts herself on high, she scorns the horse and its rider. So here in these verses, notice there, back up to verse 13, where it says, the wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but her wings and the pinions like the kindly storks. Here, God spoke of the proudly waving wings of the flightless ostrich, but perhaps Job could explain why a flightless bird has wings, or why a winged creature is flightless. If Job was so wise, maybe he could really explain all these things. Why are these things like they are? And let's ask the question here tonight, instead of just one way here tonight. What would be the reason that the ostrich was made like it is, and it does what it does? What's the reason for that? What would be the reason that it does what it does?
Is it because of her ignorance or something?
It is, but ultimately, why does the ostrich basically do what it does.
That's the way God made it.
Thank you. All right. So we got the answer. Yeah, God made it that way, right? And notice even in the verses there, and he says in verse 17, because God deprived her of wisdom and did not endow her with understanding. So again, the answer is right there, isn't it? It's God. God's the one that allows it to be so. And then, so here we see this, but he asks the question there, is asking really, the question to Job is, if basically if you're so smart, why is the ostrich this way? Why does it bury its eggs on the ground and doesn't really give a lot of thought and everything else, and as far as even in wisdom? And the answer is, again, because God made it that way, but Job couldn't even come to that conclusion. Also, a couple different comments here on verse 13 there. A Dr. Gary Anderson, we've mentioned him before, he says this on verse 13. It says, it is what it is, a silly bird, because God made it so. Why? The comical account suggests that amid the profusion of creatures, some were made to be useful to men, but some are there just for God's entertainment and ours. That's a great statement, isn't it? Sometimes, I think God just says, he creates, whatever it is that we're dealing with at hand, he creates it mainly for his own pleasure. And, if he wants to make a bird that's flightless and looks maybe as Dr. Anderson put it, a little silly, it's up to God to do so.
Hey, Pastor,
Mm-hmm.
that's just like he created the skunk, but look what the skunk does.
Yeah.
Squirt you.
Yeah, that's his defense, right? Yeah, you don't want the business end of that. And, and I thought about this too, and just like he's talking about the ostrich, and sometimes we think, yeah, that's kind of silly and whatnot. I wonder how God looks at us sometimes, when we're disobedient to him. Whenever we may not have almost as much sense as the ostrich at times, whenever we know what is pleasing to God, and if we do it, or go ahead and do it, we know it's sin, number one. But yet how dumb that is, isn't it? To go realize, why in the world would we go against a holy God? So sometimes, that thought came to me today as I was going back over the notes for tonight, and, it's just that very fact alone, how sometimes we're probably not as smart at moments. Notice in verse 17 where it says, because God deprived her of wisdom, it did not endow her with understanding. Here God reminded Job that God is the dispenser of wisdom. He gives or withholds as he pleases. So here we see that even in this verse, where God is the one that does that. He's the one that deprives of wisdom and actually gives wisdom. And you think about that even for ourselves here tonight. You think about that we know Jesus Christ as Savior. I trust that each one here does. He's the one that gives us that wisdom, that understanding, to be able to realize, hey, this Savior, at the moment when we heard the gospel and we responded to it, that he gave us that wisdom to be able to realize, hey, I need this Savior. I need him in my life. I need forgiveness of sins because I'm in violation of a holy God. And he's the one that does that. And what a blessing it is that he gives us that wisdom to be able to not only come to that understanding of it, but also to the point of accepting it. Elmer B. Smith is his last name. Another theologian said this in verse 17. He said, the seemingly cruelty to her young derives from the practice of driving off the yearlings when mating season arrives. So there in verse 17, I'm sorry, not verse 17, it's early on. Verse 16, she treats her young harshly as though they were not hers. So that's where that comes into play. And that was Dr. Schmick's thought on that as well. Verse 19 there, through verse 25, he's talking about, do you understand or master the horse? So here's another animal that he brings up. In verse 19, notice he says, have you given the horse strength? He's asking Job this. Have you clothed his neck with thunder? Can you frighten him like a locust? Isn't that amazing? You think about horse and the things that scare it. You see like even some of the, maybe even the cowboy movies or whatever, and it comes up on a snake and it's like, ooh, and it goes ballistic. And, it does not like the snake, and you think about even, this came to mind, doesn't have to be very on this per se, but I think about even an elephant, with even like a mouse and things of that nature. Here's this mighty, mighty elephant and scared of a mouse, and anyway, we've had a couple of mice in our house and the girls are scared. That's one thing. But for an elephant, one of the biggest creatures in the world, if you think about that, and once again, was that just because for God's pleasure, for his amusement? And once again, he's the one that made them like they are. And so here he says, verse 20, can you frighten him like a locust? His majestic snorting strikes terror. Verse 21, it says, he paws in the valley and rejoices his strength. He gallops in the clash of arms, or in battle, basically speaking there. Verse 22, he mocks at fear and is not frightened, nor does he turn back from the sword. Verse 23, the quiver rattles against him, the glittering spear and javelin. He devours the distance with fierceness and rage, nor does he come to a halt because the trumpet has sounded. As the blast of the trumpet, he says, aha. He smells the battle from afar, the thunder of captains and shouting. And I'm sure everyone's seen some type of a movie with, I watched the old movie the other day, it was called the Charge of the Light Brigade. Anyway, old movie and about a historical event. And it was amazing, all those horses, they were outgunned and everything, riding right into an area they should have had no business riding into. It was all, anyway, we'll get into the history of it. Anyway, horses, they're all riding straight in, and all this gunfire and artillery and everything going on, but they're just honed in right exactly in where they're headed. And that's exactly what he's describing here, isn't he? He's describing these horses, and you think about that. Notice verse 22, he says, he mocks at fear and is not frightened, nor does he turn back from the sword. Here, God's put this within a horse, to be able to have this type of mannerism, to be able to have this type of strength, of not only of just in muscle and mass, but also in wisdom and in their own minds. This is how he's created them. And once again, we come back to that fact, that God is the one that's created even the horse, the way it is. And this is, again, as we're going through each one of these, we say, well, why is he, really pressing Job with all of these different animals and all of these things? It's to get him to understand how little and insignificant really not only Job is, but we are, even today, without God. And also how mighty he is. He's the creator of this universe. And for us, and as he's going to continue to talk to Job and get across the point, for him to be able to, at times, not treat God as respectfully as he should, we really have to come back again to our lives. We need to be able to look at God and be able to realize, hey, this is the God of the universe that we're talking to. And as we've mentioned so often, he's not just the man upstairs or, some grandfatherly figure, but he's God. And that's also a blessing, isn't it? We should have a holy reverence for that, but also coupled with the idea and the realization that, hey, This God wants to have a relationship with me. What a blessing that is, isn't it? So here he goes on, and notice in verse 25, there where he says, in the blast of trump, he says, aha, and smells the battle from afar, the thunder of captains and shouting. A couple of different thoughts here, verse 19, let's back up there to verse 19, where he says, have you given the horse strength? Have you clothed his neck with thunder? So he's asking Job specifically here, are you the one that's given the horse strength? Do you have the ability to do this? And throws it out there basically in his lap. In verse 19 here, like many, Job could be impressed with the majestic strength of the horse, yet Job could give the horse no strength. Think about that. We can look at a horse, we can see him riding and just getting it. And we can appreciate that. But no man or woman could ever give that horse the strength to do that. Then we can put a spur in him and get him to go. But as far as the strength itself, that's not in our ball game, is it? And so who is it that gives them the strength? It's God. And that's his point, is that God is the one that does this. It's not man, and it's not Job, and it's not us. Also in verse 22, he says, he mocks, talking about the horse again, he mocks at fear and is not frightened, nor does he turn back from the sword. Job could give no explanation for the warrior nature of a horse, which operates against reason and the self-interest of the horse. Think about that. For us, if you're going into battle and bullets start whizzing at you, you're ducking and laying down and, trying to get out of harm's way. The horse, it just keeps right on going. So it's totally opposite, even to our line of thinking and reasoning. But again, who made it that way? God did. Elmer B. Smith here, we mentioned him earlier, he says, John Trapp said this, in this creature, therefore, we have a clear instance of the wonderful power and wisdom of God. If the horse be so strong and warlike, what is the Almighty than man of war? That's a great statement, isn't it? Think about it. Let me read that one more time. In this creature, talking about the horse, he says, therefore, we have a clear instance of the wonderful power and wisdom of God. If the horse be so strong and warlike, what is the Almighty, talking about God himself, than man of war? And so he's saying that as you look at even the horse and how mighty and gallant and strong that this horse is, how much more our God is, ultimately. And he gives us these pictures, doesn't he? He gives us all these examples, just like we were talking about a few weeks ago, about even in creation. We look about in creation, and if we can't see God in creation, then there's a definite problem, isn't there? And he gives us example after example, and again tonight, even in his creatures, showing the magnificence and the awesomeness of God. It's not about the horse. It's not about the ostrich. It's not about any of these animals in particular. God's bringing all these things, all these creatures up for the one reason. What is that? For Job to bring him glory and honor. Because he's the one that created these things. And Job has no power to touch it. Then verses 26 down through verse 30. The last few verses. Here, do you understand or master the hawk or the eagle? I can dare say here at the end, the answer is obviously going to be no. And notice here, verse 26, does the hawk fly by your wisdom? So he asks the question again to Job, right? Very pointed question. Does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings towards the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? On the rock it dwells and resides, on the crag of the rock in the stronghold. From there it spies out the prey, its eyes observe from afar. You know, you think about that, and that's always amazed me. It's always kind of humorous traveling, when we were traveling, and my dad, he would always be looking around, and he would always say, hey, there's a hawk in that tree, you know, and point out where there was a hawk. But it's amazing when you stop to watch them, and actually I've seen them from out back here. A lot of them will be up in those trees right on the tree line there, looking over the field, and it's amazing how that bird, and a hawk's not necessarily a huge bird, definitely not like an eagle, but how it can see something in that ground, and as soon as it sees it, you can see just, I mean, like a dart. It grabs that thing up, and you know, like, how did you see that? This little bird, you know, up in the tree, and how it has that not only the keenness but also the eyesight. You know, we probably all wish we had that kind of eyesight. But yet they're able to see those things. And again, who is it? Just like he says, he asks the question: does the hawk fly by your wisdom, Job? Are you able to make that bird fly? He goes on. It says, as he spreads its wings. Then he goes into verse 27, talking about the eagle. Does the eagle mount up at your command? I forget right off, I should have wrote it down, how far up an eagle can actually soar to. I mean, it's staggering how far an eagle can actually climb. And it's amazing. And actually, we're really blessed as far as in this area to be able to see eagles. I can't tell you how many times it's come over the Varina Bridge. You see eagles flying over, and they nest down around by the river. Yes?
I just thought about something when you was talking about the birds. How about them vultures? When things get hit on the road and they know where around.
Yeah.
And then we was in my yard the other day, brother, this is the truth, he man's coming, and he had some old squirrels or something in the old trash can we were throwing away.
Oh.
And the time we pulled in, it wasn't but 2 or 3 minutes. Them things were circling over us.
Isn't that something?
Circling over. And I've seen birds on the bridge just dive down in that water to get fish, and you can't see them in that water, but the birds can.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
And then I just thought, he said he loves us more than he does animals.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said that I will take care, I love you more than I do the animals. But like you said, it has to be something to give them that instinct. Because how does them vultures, you don't see them nowhere. If something hits them on the side of the road, that ain't wrong, they come in.
Yeah.
And then they'll eat it and get rid of it, and the county likes that. So they don't have to come and eat
Yeah, they
it.
don't have to come out and drag out the carcass, that's true. Yeah, actually, I saw one today coming over the bridge out of Hopewell up Route 10. There was one, and it actually took me back. I actually glanced, I was watching the road, but I had to glance back at it. It was up at the top of a tree. It was one of the vultures, turkey buzzards, whatever you call them. And he was sitting there with his wings just straight out. But he was just sitting there, and it was kind of like, what? And there was a bunch of other ones, but they're just sitting there with their wings down. But he was just sitting there, like, you know, I don't know what he's doing, but anyways, very interesting. I guess he was enjoying the breeze. But notice here, he goes on here, he talks about the eagle, and he asks the question there again, verse 27, does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? Notice he says in verse 28, on the rock it dwells and resides, and on the crag of the rock in the stronghold. Do you ever see an eagle where it makes its nest? It's in some of the, craziest of places that we would think, and only an eagle could get there. In some of those areas of rock and mountainsides, and where no climber could probably even get to. And it's probably the point. And you see the difference here? And why are they making their nest there? To protect their young, right? But then you have the ostrich. Let's say in comparison, you have the ostrich who's just going and puts their egg on the ground, right? And again, we say, well, what's wrong with that bird? Once again, it's God. God's the one that created it to be so. And for His good pleasure. And so, and again, it's not up to us. And that's what He's also telling Job. God's will is not up to us.
how he decides everything to be. And he goes on into verse 29, from there it spies out the prey, its eyes observe from afar, once again, even an eagle. And it even soars even higher than the hawks. And it can see, prey and everything else that it's needing to get. And it says in verse 30, the last verse, it says, its young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there it is. And just like we were talking about the vultures, and where the slain are, there all of a sudden, there it is. It comes right out of nowhere. And again, who gives it that instinct? It's not Job, and it's not us, it's God. And we come back to that conclusion, don't we? A couple thoughts here under verse 26. After considering many land animals and their wisdom and mystery, God turns to the hawk. Job could not explain, much less create, the mechanics of flight for this noble bird. And then in verse 27, where he says the eagle mounts up at or to ask the question, does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? Job was equally powerless to explain the eagle and its ways, much less to command it. And then here in conclusion, here just to sum up this chapter, God did not come to Job as a judge or policeman. He came to Job as a teacher, a loving, winsome, vivid, powerful teacher. God was once again with Job in his proper relation, but also realizing that was enough for Job. So here, he's coming to Job as a teacher, getting him to understand that, hey, this isn't even about Job. And it's in this whole scenario, we come back to the question, what was it that was the reason why God allowed ultimately everything to transpire to Job, or in Job's life? What was the main reason that we would say? Well, there's a couple different ones, I guess you could argue. But what would be a main reason why God allowed everything to occur up to this point? What would be your
To get
thought?
Job's attention.
Yeah, there's attention, right? Yeah. And
We
for,
need for Job to see who God was.
right. Yeah. It's for his glory, right? It's for Job to understand that everything that's happening, even his dialogue that Job had no idea about, the friends had no idea about, Elihu didn't have any idea about, that conversation God had with Satan. No one knew about that, right? But guess what? That wasn't up to God to have to even talk to Job about that. Why? Ultimately, it's none of Job's business. Job was, and sometimes we forget that, don't we? We think that at times we think people owe us something, in a sense. And guess what? God doesn't owe us anything. He doesn't owe us an explanation of why he does what he does. Even all these different animals we're talking about tonight. Why did he make those things that way? He doesn't really even have to explain to us. He does. He's explained to us exactly why and all the things that each one does and how they were made and their temperaments and everything else. But God doesn't have to do that. Why? Because he's God and we are not. So we have to remember and come back, and he's also putting that into Job's mind here and heart, is that God is the one that's in control. We're not. And Job's obviously realizing that, and even through this discourse with God, he's understanding it more and more. And once again, as we've been saying all along, as we are delving into each one of these chapters, that's what should be what we come back with the idea that, hey, God, let him be God. And realize that, hey, he's just called us to be followers after him. And no matter what he allows into our life, whether it's good times or sorrowful times, to still realize that, hey, he is still in control.
And also here, one other thought, I'm just going to end with this. James E. Bradley said this, a great quote. He says this, "One thought and one only is brought into the foreground. The world is full of mysteries, strange, unapproachable, and overpowering mysteries that you cannot read. Trust in the power and in the wisdom and in the goodness of Him, the Almighty One who rules it." Isn't that a great statement? Let me read it one more time. He says, "One thought and one only is brought into the foreground." We're talking about this whole chapter. And he's talked about many different animals and all of those things. And he says, the world is full of mysteries, strange, unapproachable, overpowering mysteries that you cannot read. Trust in the power and in the wisdom and in the goodness of Him, the Almighty One who rules it. And really that's what we want to end on, is just the realization of that very fact, is that in all of this, you say, well, what's the point to be able to tell Job how the horse operates? Why the ostrich, is not able to fly, and why at times it may seem a little dumb, and those types of things. Is that the point? And the answer is no. The answer in the end is, hey, let God be God and realize that, hey, He is the one. He's the Almighty One that's set everything in motion, that created everything. I think about that. I was thinking about this today. Was even on the ark, how, and they can argue, well, how did they get all those things on? Well, they're all eggs. I believe God allowed all those animals to come to the ark. I don't think Noah was out scrounging around for every one of those animals. But anyway, that's another whole scenario. But you think about that and how all those animals came to the ark and how, under God's control. And how in the world did that happen? He created them, just like we're seeing tonight. He's the one that has created all of these various animals we talked about tonight, and those are just a handful. But it's still the same point. You can sit here and go through every animal, insect, bird, whatever, fish, and it still comes back to the same conclusion. What is that? God has made everything in this whole universe for one reason, and that's to give Him worship, glory, and praise. And as we mentioned so often, everything else is doing exactly like He created it to. We may look at the ostrich and shake our head and walk off like, no hope for him. But here's the realization: God created him to be that way. And He created us for one way too. What is that? To glorify Him. So are we glorifying Him? Are we living our lives in such a way that we're putting Him first in everything that we do, everything that we say? So many times we're failing, but we need to get back up, right? I think about that so often whenever we wake up in the morning and, hey, He's given us a whole new day, right? Clean slate to live for Him. So are we doing that? So what a blessing it is to be able to continue to look through these chapters and to be able to glean the truths from them. And ultimately, it's not just gleaning it, but applying them, right? That's where it comes down to. Yes?
What's the blank for question number 3?
Question number 3. We'll go back to that. Questions concerning animate. Number 2 was inanimate nature. Number 3 was questions concerning animate nature. All right, and we'll begin chapter 40 next week. So keep that in mind. All right. Tell you what, let's have a word of prayer, but then have just a couple of announcements real quick at the end. So let's have a word of prayer as we close our time. Father, thank you so much just for our time together this evening, once again, looking into your word. And I'm thankful, dear Father, how that we can even learn along with Job, realizing even more so that your power, your greatness, your awesomeness in this universe, what you've created, and it's all for your glory. I pray, dear Father, as we look at ourselves, and sometimes we can get puffed up in our own selves and how wrong that thinking and that train of
living is. Really, we're nothing in this universe without you. And I pray, dear Father, that you'd help us, each one of us, to be able to realize that you've created us for a purpose, and how humbling that is. That you'd ever even keep us alive because of our sinfulness in our lives at moments, and from what you've brought us out of, what a blessing that is. And I thank you, dear Father, for even just your coming to earth and dying on the cross for our sins. And the God of the universe stepped out of heaven to do that on our behalf. And I pray, dear Father, you'd help us in our lives each day to be able to not only see you as holy, not only see you as almighty and the creator of this universe, but as a God that we should be following and living for. And I pray, dear Father, that you'd help us to be able to be faithful stewards of each day that you give to us. Pray, dear Father, help us to be a testimony of your grace and your mercy to those around us as well. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Just a couple of announcements. Number one, if anybody wants to stay to help just for a few minutes, we're going to try to arrange the tables in the back for the dinner on Sunday. So keep that in mind if you would, if you're able to. It shouldn't take very long. Also, as far as Sunday, if you haven't signed up for the dinner, there's a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board in the hallway. And on there, if you would just put your name, you just put the last name, and just how many dinners. As far as if you're going to stay, you can put how many dinners you'll be needing, or if you're going to want them to go. So we're going to do it that way too. If you want them to go, how many there as well. So again, that's all there on the board. And again, the cost is $6, and you just pay Sunday whatever you tell them. And let's see, there was something else. Well, yeah. As far as Sunday, we're going to be having a baptism. Kate will be baptized finally, so thank the Lord for that. And also we'll be having the business meeting, so keep that in mind. We'll be having that right after the baptism. And so keep that in mind, we'll be having that. But at least you won't have to worry about lunch. So that's the good news. So anyway, so lunch will be provided. So keep all those things before. Any questions about anything?
Don't have to eat by myself.
What's that?
I won't have to eat by myself.
You won't have to eat by yourself. Oh, yeah, that's a good thing, right? Yeah. Well, it'll be a good meal. And so anyway. All right. Well, anyway, I guess we've already prayed, so God bless it. And if you want to stay and help